Good evening, everyone. I am Cal Gibbs, host of the podcast Diverse Talking Heads. I have a question for you. Have you ever been to a restaurant and noticed that service is much slower than before? Or maybe perhaps you noticed the help wanted signs posted everywhere. They're very noticeable, aren't they? Or maybe you have heard people complain about the immigrants coming into this country. You might be one of those that are complaining about it. Well, tonight on Diverse Talking Heads podcast, we will discuss the immigration problem in this country, how it ties into our everyday life, and what can be done about it, and how we can help immigrants be more comfortable, more familiar with our country. Only on Diverse Talking Heads podcast. All right, y'all. Here we go. Here we go. Another episode of Diverse Talking Heads podcast. I'm your host, Calvin Gibbs. And when we first chose this topic, I did not realize how expansive it is. But as I started doing my research and pulling back layers after layers of facts about immigration, I realized that this subject is tied into a lot of things in our everyday life that we may or may not even consider. So, with me tonight, I have our staff of panelists. Please welcome Amy. Amy, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you.
And we have Charlie.
Calvin, thanks for having me.
Welcome, Charlie. And we have Dan.
Hello, Calvin.
Hello, Dan. And we have JD.
Hello, Calvin. Happy 2023.
Happy 2023 to you as well. Well, we are going to get started. I think it's really a good thing that we have this topic to start the year off, since it has been in the news lately. We're going to talk about immigrants and them getting settled in the US. We're going to talk about the economy and how they tie into it, and maybe some suggestions on how to help immigrants coming in get settled in this country. So let's start with our first line of questionings. And I'm going to ask JD this. JD, what are some ways that immigrants can be helped to adjust to life in America?
Maybe some training. Maybe
Training as far as training as far as
Can't hear you, Calvin.
okay, training as far as
Are you guys able to hear Calvin? I
yes.
can't.
Oh,
Uh,
can you
okay,
hear?
then
He's asking about types of training, if you want to try taking that.
Maybe train. Maybe how? I'd have to think about that.
okay.
Sorry.
Well, that's okay. We're going to move on to the next panelist. I'm going to ask Amy. Amy, can you identify some ways that we can help immigrants get comfortable in their new home in America?
Sure. I've been fortunate to donate and spend some time with this really great organization in the county where I used to live, where were a number of different resources, such as English classes, both for parents and children, some basic childcare services, because you have to think, when you come, you don't have maybe no connections, or you're really just trying to get your feet on the ground. So if you're out looking for employment or something like that, knowing that there's a place where somebody will help you take care of your family. Computer lessons, because, you're again learning in a brand new language. So some basic skills that will make you be able to get a better job in the job market. So a lot of things that, we might have taken for granted and learned early on in school, they're relearning, having to adapt to a different way of doing things. Like I said, a couple of times, language. So just a number of different resources can be helpful.
Okay, great. Those are great ideas. Dan, I'm going to ask you the same question, and Charlie, you'll be behind Dan.
Well, there's lots of ways we can help out. Obviously, like organizations like Amy was talking about that give help. A lot of times, immigrants get help from the group that came before them. So a lot of groups form their own support structure to help the next wave from their own country or culture that they come from, and they're able to help them and say, hey, this is what I found out. We've developed some support systems. Here's how you can plug into programs. Sometimes it's employment. They say, well, why don't you work for me initially, and then I'll give you a leg up, and then you can move on to other types of work or get a chance to, the downside of that sometimes is don't learn English quite quickly enough, but there's also English lessons and other things like that, and helping you how to get your kids into school and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's a lot of different ways that over time that people have adapted to coming to this country.
Okay. And Charlie, I'm going to ask you the same question. And on the end of that, I'm going to ask, do you believe that immigration helps American culture?
Well, I'll answer that question first, Calvin. That's a big yes. The integration issue for me is a very personal one, because my first wife is from another country. And she came to graduate school in the US, which I was also attending, and that's where I met her. We subsequently married. And during that time, she was in graduate school. She completed her master's and her PhD, and subsequently became a college professor, which she did for a number of years. So it was some time ago that happened, but I went through the whole process of her going through the immigration process when she came here. Of course, she came on a student visa. And subsequently, we married and went through, and we got permanent residence here, which was a time period of that, which I think back then was 5 years. And about a year before we actually divorced, she became an American citizen. So I have a lot of personal thoughts about that. I'll also mention I have a close friend now, which we're close friends with, he and his wife. I'm going to go back just a little bit. Back to when I was in graduate school, I also worked at the international services offices. So we helped a lot of students, new students coming to the U.S., getting acclimated, settled here when they were going to where we all went to college and all that, getting them acclimated to the system, introduce them to people and things like that. So I was heavily at one point in my life very involved in all this. More recently, we have a friend of mine who married a guy from Romania. And they're very good friends of ours. They had met originally online, and they married, and they subsequently he came to the U.S. and he's actually remodeled my house. So we're very good friends with him, and tried to help him out in that business, which he's not now in, but he's doing other things now. But he's a very hardworking guy. So at least in a small way, myself and my spouse try to help her on that. So immigration to me is it's a very personal issue. And yes, immigrations do add a lot to our country.
Okay, well, Charlie, with all due respect, I heard you say how you have benefited
Mhm.
from immigrants. You got a wife and
Mhm.
and a gentleman, but how do they, as a incoming force, help American culture?
Oh, they help in the ways that they bring the things in from their own culture here.
Mm.
And they learn, we learn from their culture. And for instance, my ex-wife's from Taiwan, and I knew her. I knew a lot of other Taiwan people as well back then. And I learned a great deal from the culture. I've also been to Taiwan as well, which is a whole other story that's I don't have time for maybe on this podcast. But so I learned a great deal from that. And she came here and she was in the computer field and she learned a lot in that field. She was able to give that to students later as a college professor, which she did for a number of years. And I think she gave a lot on there. And I think probably she gave a lot culturally as well. Her sister also came over to the US and I learned and lived near us. And I also learned, and they both brought a lot in, as well as other people. And we had the university I was at had a lot of people from many different countries attending there at the time.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, Charlie. Next question I'm just going to throw out there for whoever wants to pick it up. And that question is, does the U.S. need immigrant workers?
I think they are a fairly exploited workforce. So I think you can go two routes with that. I think if you go the very high road positive route, any infusion of different ways of looking at things and new ideas, including coming from a different culture, a different frame of mind, a different reference, I think that is always beneficial. Because if a group, even like something like our society, becomes too siloed and always looking at things through one particular frame, then we can miss innovation and creativity and new ideas and so on. So that's the high road. I think the sad, darker reality side is that it's an easy target workforce to exploit, where they don't necessarily know the laws, or there's some protections that don't apply if you're not a citizen. And I hate to say that we need it, but I think a lot of things that we enjoy are built on the backs of us not necessarily treating everybody fairly, and an immigrant workforce being a big component of that.
Okay. Okay. Now you used a word that is very interesting to me in this concept. You used the word exploit. And are they really exploited, or are these just jobs nobody else wants, or are we looking to give them the lower paying job, or what exactly do you mean by exploit them?
Sure. No, thank you for asking me to follow up on that. I think that in some cases they are jobs that people want because they are not fairly paid. That you're asking folks to work, a full-time number of hours without necessarily getting the benefits that we as citizens expect, like healthcare, overtime, if you've got that particular pay grade, being able to afford to live in a city. And I'm not talking like, oh, they want a mansion, they want a laptop. Like, no, just absolutely being paid a living wage. I'm certainly not going to say that, every entry-level job is exploited, or that every employer exploits employees. I'm not going to paint it in that broad of strokes, but I think absolutely, if you've got workers who don't know their rights or don't have the same protections that everybody else does, it is unfortunately human nature for them to be taken advantage of. So yes, I deliberately use that word. I know it's a powerful word, but I think it happens.
Well, thank you for clearing that up, because in that concept, I totally agree with you. While we're waiting for JD to fix his audio, I'm going to ask the next question to both Charlie and Dan. I'm sure you both have seen help wanted signs in different venues, different businesses. You may even have had the experience like we did, of my wife and I, of going to a very nice restaurant and having to wait almost an hour because they were short on staff. Now, going back to our last president, who I forget the name of the bill or the program that he had that stopped the immigration at the Texas Mexico border. It seems that a lot of areas in American life, businesses, hospitality, for example, Title 42, thank you, Dan, is a result of not, during the pandemic, not having these people come into America. Meanwhile, the folks in America got woke, if you will, or just sick and tired of doing those jobs. And they was like, there's other things more important than, cleaning up a room after someone, or there's things more important than being a waiter or a cook or whatever the case may be. So we're going to move on to something else. And now we have this void in the country of needing to fill those jobs. Do you guys think that what President Biden is doing with Title 42, or the extension that he suggested to it of letting in 30,000 a month, is a good thing? Dan, I'm gonna ask you first.
Well, it's good and bad. I mean, it's good to let some people in because we have a shortage, and immigrants have traditionally filled those low-end jobs and moved their way up. But he's also working within the strictures of a system that we have not fixed for 40 years. Congress after Congress after Congress refuses to change it. So it leaves it in a very exploitative process. You'll see that at the low end, you'll see that at the high end. At the low end, it helps suppress wages because you can exploit people and say, hey, you're going to get thrown out of the country or whatever, and threaten them. And you're able to keep wages down. And then people who are also looking for those jobs are seeing that they're very, very low pay. And sometimes they don't even pay them. And then at the high end, you have things like H-1B, where it was built to be, it was supposed to be filling in very important positions that they couldn't find people for. However, what it turned into was this mill where you would replace people at a much lower wage. H-1B visa people are tied to the job that they are in, and they have to go home within like a month if their job ends. That can become very exploitative also, because the employer controls their entire life then. It's almost an indentured servitude, even though it's a high-end, something in computers or something like that. So we have this system that we don't want to fix. And, they threw this kind of bad Band-Aid on it. And don't forget, the Supreme Court told him he cannot get rid of Title 42. So even if he doesn't like it, he has to find a way to work with it.
That's right. That's right. Charlie, your thoughts on that?
I agree mostly with what Dan has said on that. It's kind of a double-edged sword, I think, if you will, on it. That and I like what Amy said earlier about human nature on that. Okay, our human nature is we want to help people, and there are people from other countries who need help, and they feel that they cannot live in that country and they have to come here to do that. So we do want to do that. But there is this other end of it, like, oh, we want to do it, but we only want to do it, so much, or okay, a little bit here, a little bit there, whatever, that makes us feel better about it or not. And that's a big contradiction I think we have within ourselves. And unfortunately, it is human nature for a lot of people to think that way, that they would like to help people at, the southern border, or they would like to help people, say, in Ukraine or other places as well. We've seen this before 100 years ago when we had a lot of immigration, big immigration in this country in the late 1800s, early 1900s as well. Maybe not so much on the high end as far as bringing people with special skills in, even if it's a temporary thing, but definitely just ordinary people coming in who wanted to find a better life came here. So I think part of this is kind of goes in a cycle, and it comes and it goes. It I think come again now, given certain issues of the day.
All right, thank you. I believe that earlier, Amy mentioned for immigrants coming in, they have to learn English. They need to learn how to get childcare. There's education. I think Dan mentioned that. We talked about employment, but it's just, there's more than that. It's the learning how to use money and finance, how our banking system work, how our banks work. There's also emergencies. What do you do in an emergency? How are you going to keep yourself safe? There's healthcare. I think Dan mentioned healthcare, personal health, healthcare, family issues, and housing. They need a place to live, a place to be safe. And here's a big one. Once they can qualify for it, apply for Social Security, register for selective service, apply for it, or renew a driver's license. Bringing your pet into the US. There's some cases where people are not allowed to bring their pets into this country for fear of transmission of different diseases. The rights and responsibility of lawful permanent residents. These are all things that have to be given to them. They need to be trained in. And for that, it costs additional money. I've heard some people complain that is money that could be used for people that are citizens of the US that need those same services. And here we are giving it to people that's not from this country. JD, if you're back with us, what's your thoughts on that?
I think it could go either way with this one, Calvin. I mean, I know there's a lot of organizations that are trying to help with getting some of the assistance for that. However, I think there's also that fear that as you said, funds that could be used for those who, as you said, and citizens, as U.S. citizens that I'm making reference to. I guess my question to them, like, how is it? Are we going to be trying to get that from like nonprofit organizations, tax, or the means, donations? That would be my question.
Okay. Very good question, by the way. My research has shown that the three industries that require lower skilled labor, if you will, is construction, agriculture, and hospitality. Now, we know that construction of new homes or buildings is directly tied into the economy. And we know how the economy is right now. It's not as strong as it was, let's say, before the pandemic, okay? Or before 2020. So if we introduce these people into America, get them acclimated to working, and maybe even filling jobs in construction, agriculture, and hospitality. Shouldn't that bring up or um, move us away from the inflation, so that the feds can maybe start lowering uh, interest rates again? Thoughts on that, Amy?
Um, that's part of it. I mean, I would think so, that if you are able to fill those vital roles, and with you mentioned the pandemic, I mean, I know we're a couple years removed from it, but there's still things where we're just getting back to, being able to get used to going out to eat as often as we did. But then you've got, as you mentioned, inflation. It costs more to go out to eat. So it costs more to keep the restaurants open. Rent costs more. I think that having more of an infusion of folks back into the workforce is going to help. I mean, there's a lot of pieces to the pie that affect inflation, but I think you're going on the right track, that yes, that should be a positive if we are able to fill all of those open roles, that we should see a positive effect from that.
Yeah, well, we're definitely not going to solve this issue on this podcast this evening, because this is easily a 2 or 3 segment podcast just on this topic alone. But
Cal, can I say one thing quickly?
yeah, sure, Charlie.
I think one other subject on this is the immersion, I can say that word, of immigrants into our culture. So even if they have know English well, or at least part of it, it is generally more difficult for the older generations to come from one country over a parent or grandparent, if you will, to emerge into the culture, because they're more into the old ways, as opposed it is to their children who come in, a boy, a teenager, a girl, whatever it may be, for them to come in, and that those children are the ones that are going to get more quickly assimilated into the American culture by watching television, hang around with American people and that sort of thing on that. So it is tougher for them. And of course, the parents are the ones, of course, have to support their children, and maybe grandparents as well on that. I think that's an important subject as well.
And on that subject, Charlie, did you know that the children of immigrants that come over here actually do much better than a lot of their peers that are American citizens?
Absolutely.
I don't know if it's the work standards they have, or the need to work harder, but they come over here and they do much better. Now,
Yes.
off this podcast, I had a conversation with someone about it, and that person seems to think that there are a lot more grants, a lot more money, a lot more special cases afforded for immigrants that we as Americans don't have. And I see Amy shaking her head no. I see Dan shaking his head no. Thoughts on that? Anybody can take that one.
So they don't have more of the money is not flowing into the immigrants per se, and being taken away from other programs. There is some support. I mean, everything costs money, but we're missing a couple things here. The immigrants start twice as many companies on average as native people. So they're quite entrepreneurial. And a lot of that is, like you mentioned, the work ethic, coming in, trying to establish yourself in a new place. A lot of immigrants we get nowadays are very educated. We shouldn't just concentrate on the lower end, although that's important, because the tradition in America is that they came in, they started at the bottom, they worked their way up, they started businesses. A lot of times they learn the English from their kids who were going to school. And a lot of that's happening. I think there's a perception that we're spending all this money on. This country was built on immigrants. My own father is an immigrant. you know, I feel this personally. I see it. I have friends who came from the Ukraine 25 years ago and became very successful, and their daughters grew up, and I just went to one of their weddings, and I saw them as immigrants come and establish themselves. And they did it by hard work. Nobody gave them anything. The government didn't give them anything. They did get some help from some nonprofit organizations. You know, support can come from a lot of places. My own synagogue, we support a Rohingya family that were, my wife was very much involved with the group that helped them learn how to do things, something as simple as going to the grocery store and figuring out how to pick food and paying. And we helped him find a job, and we helped her with prenatal care, and all these kind of things were going on. So I think Americans, given a chance, can be very generous. And we need to remember that everybody here except the indigenous tribes came from somewhere else.
Yes.
And our system has been built over the couple centuries to keep the next group out. And I think that's a fundamental part of our immigration system, which I hope someday will change.
Yes, I also agree with you, Dan. I hope that it will change. I feel that Americans can be very generous. They also can be very cruel and brutal as well. Um, I watch videos of what goes on at the southern border, and it's just crazy that we would treat people that way. And I'll leave it there because, as I said, this could be um, another podcast episode entirely. But when you have people that leave their country, their home for a variety of reasons, such as for employment opportunities or to escape a violent conflict, or there's environmental factors, or perhaps educational purposes is why they leave, or even to reunite with family. I think that the generosity needs to be shown, and we as a country should be pushing our elected officials to work together to come up with a better plan on how to handle incoming people into this country than what they are currently doing. And yes, I'm talking about, busing them somewhere where they're not even expected. And they don't know where they're at. They just show up, and they may not even be ready, clothes for that environment. They just show up on the bus and they're there. We as a people, we as a country can do better. So we're going to take a break, and that's about all for this segment of this episode. And that's immigration, helping people get together better in this country. And when we come back, we will have our round robin discussion, which will be led by one of the panelists, only on Diverse Talking Heads podcast. And we are back. This is Diverse Talking Heads podcast. And for our next segment, we will be moving into what we'd like to call our round robin discussion. This discussion will be led by panelist Amy. Amy, take it away.
All right, thank you so much. So after that topic, I wanted to take us in a totally different direction. So hopefully we're going to have a little bit of fun with this. So we as people, I think, spend a lot of time trying to learn more about ourselves, kind of what makes us the way we are. And we also, understanding that life is fragile, have a lot of questions about the future. So there's a lot of ways that we can try to get this knowledge. It can be through personality tests, whether they're science-based or whether they're a little bit more fun. But something I want to talk about, are you ready for it, is astrology. We use astrology, we in general, from everything to what kind of day am I going to have, What kind of year is this going to be? Or what kind of partner should I have in life, or who should I avoid? So I want to know, what are people's thoughts about the general subject of astrology? True believer, true skeptic, somewhere in between? Would love to hear from my fellow panelists. So someone is welcome to speak up. Otherwise, I will start calling on people.
I'll start, Amy. I'm not really into astrology, but as you may know, my present wife, since we talked about the first wife earlier, and I had the same birthday. So there's a whole astrology thing. And we are 12 years apart in age. So we are both on the zodiac cycle, which is a 12-year cycle. And we're both a year of the monkeys. So we joke about that frequently on there. So to that extent, I guess I do believe in astrology.
And your anniversary.
And that as well. Birthday. Yes, absolutely. Yep. As well as your daughter. So.
Right, exactly. And I believe you chose that deliberately because
I did.
Like, hey,
I did.
All right. Anyone else?
All right, I'll jump in. Well, when people used to ask me what sign I was, I'd say skeptico. But I have a hard time believing that some celestial body that is millions of light years away actually affects my life, even though I believe we're all built of stardust, because we all came from the cosmos. And I don't really think I think it's more of an amusing thing to me. And I know people like to play with it, and it's actually popped up in a lot of cultures in a lot of different ways. People have always been fascinated looking up into the sky, into the cosmos, and trying to figure out how things work. And I prefer to look at more of the scientific side and some of the magnificent things we see with like the Webb telescope, and just learning about the origins of the universe. But I would definitely be on the skeptical side of astrology.
More on the skeptical side. No, totally fair. JD, what are your thoughts?
I'm going to join Dan as well as Charlie as far as being the skeptic on the whole bunch. Although I will say with signs, how people say like, okay, what's your sign? And I guess they try to figure out, okay, based on whatever zodiac sign you fall under, they try to figure out, okay, based on these known traits of that particular sign, do so-and-so, whether it's me, whether it's you, or any of my fellow panelists would fall under. Do they adhere to that, or do they not? I mean, my sign, for example, I'm Scorpio, and on some of them, I was reading and I'm like thinking, I don't know if I entirely agree with some of them. Others, people think, yeah, JD does fall under that. So it could go either way on some of these signs. However, I'm going to have to join Dan as well as Charlie, that I can beg to differ on that one. I'm skeptical.
No, fair enough. And the traits that you're talking about, I do also believe that sometimes they're so general, like you like to travel, but you also like to stay at home, right? Like most of us would read that statement and say, yes, that's me. They're kind of deliberately very vague, I feel, and sometimes. Calvin, we haven't heard from you yet. Would love to hear any of your thoughts on the topic.
Absolutely. Well, I actually do believe in astrology. I believe that for my sign, which is Aries, the Ram, I do have a lot of those qualities of an Aryan. I'm hard-headed. I love a good tussle. I am loyal. And I'm very forceful when I need to be. And I think that going back thousands and thousands of years before, we had electric lights that, light up entire city, people paid attention to the stars much more than they do now. They could see them a lot better than they do now. And their a lot of their a lot of astrology is based on what they came up with during those thousands of years of looking at the stars and figuring things out, documenting. And yeah, I believe when certain planets or certain astrological phenomenon happen, it does affect us here. People go through periods of being just pissed off for no reason. Why am I so angry? You know, why am I so sad? Why do I feel this? It's because there's things going on, I believe, in the skies with the stars and the planets, and it does affect us on Earth. Think about it. We're just one of, 9, so they say 8 planets. Who's to say that what goes on or how those planets circle us wouldn't affect us here on this planet? And vice versa. If there's life on any other planet, how do we know that we're not affecting them as well? So that's my thoughts on it.
I love it. I love it. Thank you. I would align myself a little closer to what Calvin was just saying. So thank you for sharing that. That actually surprised me that was the approach that you took. And I think what I always thought it was just fun, but was very much a skeptic, was like, oh, that's interesting. Sometimes, I'd read something and think, yeah, that fits me. But for the most part, it was fun. But then I read a very interesting piece, and unfortunately I can't cite my source, but it was talking about how the seasons can affect human development. Like even, if a woman is pregnant in the winter versus being pregnant over the summer, how does the environmental aspect affect her and the child she's carrying? And I'm like, I can't say that's wrong, right? I don't know that anyone can say whether that's right or wrong, but that makes sense to me. And if you tie that to the stars are in a certain point in the sky when it's cold in some hemispheres, and they're in a certain point in the sky where it's warm in some hemispheres. And Calvin, as you were saying, and I think Dan, you alluded to this as well, over thousands of years of repeated observed behavior, I could argue that, yeah, there could be a kernel of truth to that if you have a birthday that's at this time of the year, just based on all of the different factors that went into things, you might tend to have certain outlooks or behave in a certain way versus somebody who's born in a different point in time. So I think there's a kernel of truth to it, and just appreciate everyone sharing their thoughts at me. If anyone has any final thoughts or final parting stories, like Charlie in particular, I always do go back to you and the shared birthday and the shared anniversary, like any sort of date confluence or anything like that. Would love to hear any final thoughts on the topic.
And your daughter, as we were,
and my daughter,
the
my
day,
firstborn
we married
daughter.
the day that she was born. So.
And it's also the day that my youngest sister graduated from pharmacy school. Like that particular day, a lot of stuff happens on it.
Really?
I
Okay.
had, sorry, this is a total aside. A friend of mine on Facebook said, I'm playing a game where you go and you circle a date in the future and you just try to figure out what you're going to be doing on that day. She circled that day. I don't want to say it, your birthday, Mandy's birthday, Emily's she just randomly circled it today. So there's something, it's a magical number, I guess.
I like to think that.
Yep. Calvin, that was all I had.
Well, I got one for you.
Uh-oh.
My mother was born on a Monday. My brother and I was born, well, my birthday April 13th, his is July 13th, all on the Mondays. So every year, our birthdays are on the same day of the week. Now my brother has 2 kids. His son was born on a Monday, and his daughter was born on his birthday, July 13th. Again, all on Monday. So we all have birthdays on Mondays in any given year. So if it happens to fall on Friday the 13th, Yes, we all have. We know that during that year, there's going to be a couple Friday the 13th, and it's all our birthdays.
Well,
Isn't that interesting?
if you want to
Coincidence?
get weird here, my ex-wife, who somehow got back in the show again here, and my sister have the same date of birth, month, day, and year. So
Wow!
Oh, wow.
Wow!
yeah.
Wow! Okay.
Uh,
What is that all, Amy?
That was it. I just thought it would be very fun for us to tackle a topic that was a little bit more lighthearted, and I was really curious to hear everybody's point of view on it. So hope people
Okay.
enjoyed hearing our thoughts on astrology. And yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity, Calvin. I thought it was a lot of fun. I hope other folks enjoyed it. Thank you all for playing along.
All right. Thank you, Amy, so much. Thank you, panelists. And that's about all, y'all, for this segment of Diverse Talking Heads podcast. I'm your host, Calvin Gibbs. I want to thank Amy, Dan, Charlie, and JD for being panelists today. And it's always important that we take 2 steps to the rear and get on out of here. Until the next episode of Diverse Talking Head podcast, exit stage left.